My name is Melanie Campbell, and I'm the convener of the Black Women's Roundtable and the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. This briefing is our post-election briefing to discuss a couple of things. One, to get an analysis on what actually happened, looking at race, gender, and actually also age. And we will hear from Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, with president of Insight Unlimited, who's the senior policy advisor, and also senior policy advisor for Black Women's Roundtable. Then following Avis, we will have a kind of a analysis about what actually happened. What were the victories for women from a national perspective as well as a state-based perspective. And we will hear from Dr. Elsie Scott, who is the founding director of the Ronald W. Walters Leadership and Public Policy Center at Howard University, to give that national kind of lens look, along with state-based leaders from Florida and Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Alabama. We may have one or two others that may have joined us. We may add them as well. And those state leaders are Solange Denton, convener, Florida Black Women's Roundtable, Florida Coalition on Black Civic Participation, who is also state community organizer of the AFL-CIO. Following her, Helen Butler, executive director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, who also leads our Georgia Black Women's Roundtable. Alyssa Canty, who's our state coordinator for North Carolina Black Youth Vote, and HBCU coordinator for Common Cause. P.D. Talley, convener of the Ohio Unity Coalition, secretary-treasurer, Ohio AFL-CIO. Honorable Sheila Tyson, convener of the Alabama Black Women's Roundtable and council member, Birmingham City Council. And closing that component would be Carol Joyner, director, Labor Project for Working Families, Family Values at Work. And then I'll introduce the third presentation after the race and gender analysis and the national state-based election victories. So this time I'm going to turn it over to Elsie Scott, and I ask anyone that's on the phone to please keep your phones on mute until it's your opportunity, if you're a presenter, to present. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver.
Hi, this is Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver. We're looking at the CNN exit polls to get a sense of who voted, how they voted, and how this election really broke. And any analysis of that data shows, without any sort of equivocation whatsoever, that this was a race that was decided on the basis of race. If you look at who voted for whom, Donald Trump was able to energize the white electorate, and he won based on the white electorate and the white electorate alone. Whites voted for Donald Trump across the board, across every stratification that you can imagine, across gender, across education, across age, across income level. He carried whites and nobody else. Every other racial group voted against this candidate. So this is a race where one can say, without any sort of equivocation whatsoever, that race trumped gender and everything else in terms of who made their decisions on Election Day. Looking down into that a little bit more deeply, it's important to note that this was an election, obviously, in which we had the opportunity to elect the first woman as President of the United States. And even with that potentially historical outcome, we see that although Clinton carried women generally, the reason why she carried women was completely based on the voting power of women of color. When you look at the voting habits or who women voted for across race, we see that she carried Trump carried white women and lost all other women of color. Specifically, Trump carried white women by 53%, and he lost every other category. But when we look specifically at what women voted for for Hillary Clinton, we see that black women led the way. 94% voted for Clinton. 68% of Latinas voted for Clinton. And we know that she also carried Asian women voters. So it really was women of color versus white women in this election. We know, too, that when you look at this issue stratified by college versus non-college grads, throughout the entire election cycle, we kept hearing about these quote-unquote working-class whites. And we kept hearing about these whites that had a high school education or less, with the assumption going into the election that this was Trump's stronghold, but he would ultimately lose college-educated whites. That ended up not being the case. He carried both college graduates who were white as well as non-college graduates who were white. All people of color, whether or not they were college graduate or non-degree holding, all voted for Donald Trump. We know, too, that when we look at this issue of age, we've been getting that's been getting a lot of attention in the media, particularly as it relates to the millennial vote. There is a map that I know that's been getting a lot of attention in the media that suggests that if only millennials voted, that Clinton would have carried the election handily. The fact of the matter is that when you disaggregate that data by race, you find a very different story. Here you see that Trump not only carried older whites, Generation Xers, he carried baby boomers, he carried those who were in the prime of their working years. He also carried white millennials. So this idea that younger whites might be a bit more quote-unquote post-racial than their parents and those of older generations really did not bear out in the facts when you look at who voted for whom. So once again, there is another suggestion there that at the end of the day, white women particularly, tended to privilege race over gender in terms of their voting decisions, and even young whites tended to break with their older white counterparts when it came to their voting decisions. Now, as it relates to the black vote, I think there are a couple of things that's very important to sort of mention. What we saw last Tuesday, in my estimation, is the result of years and years and years of voter suppression efforts being successful in a variety of key states across the nation. We know that there has been a lot of attention brought to this issue of whether or not blacks turned out, whether or not blacks were excited. The fact of the matter is, according to exit poll data, the turnout rate for blacks was only 1% lower than it was in 2012, which actually is quite astounding and incredible, given the fact that this is the first presidential election that we've seen post the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and given the fact that we have seen years of cumulative efforts meant to suppress the black vote that has had some key impacts in key states that I would argue could have flipped the election the other way. So, for example, if you look at the example of Florida, we know that Florida is one of the very few states in the nation that has in place felony disenfranchisement laws that actually last for life. Okay, so once you are a convicted felon in Florida, you never get your voting rights back unless you make a special appeal to the governor. And under this administration, the Republican control of that state, it has become virtually impossible for those individuals to get their voting rights back. Clinton lost that state by roughly 120,000 votes, and there are some 1.5 million Floridians who are impacted by the felony disenfranchisement laws in that state. And so clearly, just by that one law alone, we are talking about holding back over 1 million potential voters that could have easily swung that election in the other way, given what we know to be the disproportionate impact of that law on the black community. Also, if you look at Wisconsin, for example, a state that the president had run, we know that under Scott Walker, that particular state has undergone some very aggressive voter disenfranchisement laws, particularly focusing on voter ID. There's been lots of complaints around individuals in the DMVs in Wisconsin, giving individuals misinformation with regards to what specific type of ID that they need to be able to vote. And there was significant confusion reported on the day of the election, with people coming to the polls believing that they had the right ID, only to be turned around. At the end of the day, we know that Trump won that state by less than 30,000 votes, but as many as 300,000 people as is estimated, ultimately were not able to vote because they lacked the proper ID. And so what we're seeing in terms of this overall outcome, I believe, are two big takeaways. The number one takeaway is that the black vote did turn out. It turned out especially strong given the inhibitants that were put in front of that specific community, a variety of different factors that have been put into place over the course of several years, as well as new aggressive actions that were put into place after the loss of the Voting Rights Act. But at the end of the day, having all sorts of different hurdles to overcome, having early voting days shortened, having the early voting locations actually eliminated in many states, virtually eliminated in many states, as in North Carolina, having a variety of other options and obstacles to overcome, that in a significant way, I believe, impacted the ability of the black vote to really be able to be maximized. At the same time, we know that as it relates to gender, with this being a potentially historic election, and with a white woman specifically running for president of the United States, we do know that there was some conjecture that this candidate would be able to do something that other Democratic candidates had not been able to do, and that would have been to carry the white women's vote. But ultimately, that turned out to be fool's gold, as has been the case, quite frankly, consistently as it relates to the white woman's vote. They once again broke for the Republican candidate, even when this was a candidate that had some very significant flaws as it relates to statements that he'd made and actions that he was accused of, specifically related to very, very disturbing acts against women. And so at the end of the day, this was a race election. This was a race election in which just the white electorate seemed to be extremely, if not specifically focused on this issue of prioritizing their sort of racial privilege in America, which I think is a strong assertion. At minimum, one could argue that given all of the statements that were made over the course of this campaign from the very day in which it was launched, one could at least say that this was an electorate where, generally speaking, the white population either voted to preserve their privilege or voted to sort of ignore the consistent racist and sexist overtones throughout the course of the campaign.
Thank you, Avis. We're going to hold questions until the end for media. Thank you so much for that analysis. We will move to the second component of our briefing, which is the national state-based election victories for women. And we will start off with our co-host of the Ronald W. Walters Unity Command Center, Dr. Elsie Scott, who's also a board member here at the National Coalition, to start us off on victories. And I'll just follow with we follow by Solange Benton of Florida, Helen Butler from Georgia, Alyssa Canty from North Carolina, Petey Talley from Ohio, Sheila Tyson from Alabama, and Carol Joyner for Labor Project for Working Families, in that order.
Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to join you today. We are still in the process of compiling all the data about the wins of women, but we do have the data compiled around the U.S. Congress. And the major victory for black women was that we added, for the first time in a number of years and only the second time in history, a black woman to the U.S. Senate. Kamala Harris won the Senate seat in the state of California. We also added 2 black women to the U.S. House of Representatives, Val Demings from Central Florida, Orlando area, and Linda Blunt Rochester, who is the first woman and the first person of color from the state of Delaware to ever get elected to a seat from the state of Delaware. And Val Demings picked up a seat. This was not originally a seat where we had a black member of Congress, so we consider those to be significant wins. Now, in terms of women in the Congress, this brings our numbers up to 21 women in the House of 20 women in the House of Representatives. That includes 2 non-voting delegates from the Virgin Islands and from the District of Columbia, and 1 woman in the Senate. So that brings a total of 21 women in Congress. All of the female members who are women, African American women, won their re-election, despite the fact that before the election there were some reports that Mia Love, who's the black female who's a Republican from the state of Utah, there was reports that she was going to lose her seat, but she did not lose her seat. In fact, all of the members, the black members of Congress who ran in the general election were reelected, including all of the females in the House of Representatives. Another significant win that we would like to highlight, even though it's not a national, in the Minnesota House of Representatives, for the first time you've had a black woman of Somali descent to win a seat in the Minnesota House. And this is significant because there was campaigning in Minnesota sort of painting the Somali population as being terrorists or potential terrorists. And so she won and was able to win against a man who had been in that seat for a number of years. And so that's a significant victory for women as well as for the Somali immigrants who live in this country. For the first time, you have a black woman won for sheriff in the state of Texas. In Beaumont, Texas, you have a new black woman, new sheriff in town, who's a black woman. The Black Lives Movement and some other people who've been engaged in dealing with police accountability registered some significant wins in the last election. There were 3 new black female prosecutors elected in Orange County, Florida, which is where the Trayvon Martin case was adjudicated, in Chicago, Illinois, where we've had a number of controversial cases, and in St. Louis. So all 3 of those counties now have black female prosecutors. And in addition, we had 1 black male prosecutor that was elected in Henry County, Georgia, which is one of the suburban counties of Atlanta. There was only 1 black prosecutor that we've been able to find, and we're still drilling down in that data, who lost, and that was a black male in Cincinnati. And that's interesting because the day after the election, there was a hung jury in the case of the black man who was killed by the University of Cincinnati police officer. Also, and this is not directly related to women, but we're looking at police accountability measures, because black women have been very much engaged in working on police accountability. And so there were several measures, and we're trying to pull them all up in terms of providing more civilian oversight of police departments. But I think the most significant one probably was in Oakland, California, where they approved new powers for civilian review of the Oakland Police Department. And I think it's at least 4 other places, but we're still doing research on that. The sad side of the story is that all of the black people who ran for statewide office, for statewide executive offices, lost except for 1 man who ran for the Supreme Court in the state of North Carolina. We had a black woman that ran for lieutenant governor in the state of North Carolina who lost. We had a black woman who ran for Secretary of State in the state of Missouri who lost. We had a black woman who ran for state auditor in the state of West Virginia, and she lost also. So, And there was also a black woman who ran for superintendent of public instruction for the state of Washington. So that is not a good news story there. So we see that really, and last time with the 5 women who lost in the state of Georgia. I think this is an opportunity if we can look at how do we get more grassroots organizing. Because in talking with the Linda Coleman, who ran for lieutenant governor in North Carolina, she felt like she needed more resources where people would know that she was actually running. There were a lot of people in those rural areas, and even in the Charlotte area maybe, who did not know that you had a black woman on the ballot and she didn't have money for airtime. And so that may be an opportunity next time to look at as we organize college students who want to go out and do some get out to vote. There may be some opportunities for us to organize some trips to get people to do weekend, knock on doors, so that they will know that these people are running for office. And there'll probably be more black women running in the next election, because I think there will be more states where we have a greater black population that will be in play in the last election. But most of the states that had statewide executive office elections this time were not states where we had large numbers of black people living. We re-won. We kept the mayor of Baltimore. So this is what, the third black woman, I think, as mayor. So they've named that the black woman seat in Baltimore. Catherine Pugh was elected mayor in the city of Baltimore. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, there were 2 black women in the race. One black woman, Sharon Broome Weston, is now in a runoff that will be held on December the 10th or the 11th, whatever's the second Saturday in December. And just one final thing, that we are still compiling all of the black women who won for mayors, but interesting to people in Washington, D.C. may be Tamara James, who used to be a WNBA player here with the Washington Mystics. She won. She went back home to her hometown in Florida, and she won, and she's now the new mayor in her hometown. So we'll continue to compile information, but there are some good news stories that we have to report about black women running and winning.
Thank you, Elsie. I'm going to ask that we hear from Solandra Benton, Helen Butler, and then Elisa Canty, and then we'll do the last 3 ladies following them. So Solandra, are you still there?
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, ladies, for this gathering. As Elsie had already spoken about, Avis had already hit on it. We really try to educate and turn out in this election. Our women, black women, even women of color had reached out to us and trying to assist them as well as in some of their GOTV. So our successes that we have seen so far, stuff is still coming in, as Elsie said, but we were able to get Val Simmons elected, with black women really leading the way in that race as well, and helping with that strongly in Central Florida, working with the Black Women Roundtable, educating and just really engaging the community on the importance of that, and also with our state attorney, Amaris, and using and engaging people that Ava spoke about with the rights restoration, engaging them that even though they could not vote, but they could be activists in the community and educating people why it's important to cast, a vote and be a part of this election cycle. And then in our state Senate, we was able to get that came out of South Florida, Daphne Campbell, who's actually a Haitian descent background, was elected to the state Senate. And so we have a couple, and there's James also being the mayor and a couple of others around the state. We feel as though that we, made some change, impact, but we know there's a lot of work ahead of us, and we really have to do a lot of education. There was a lot of suppression that we've seen on the ground, even though the turnout was there, but yet people were still trying to suppress the vote, and even with the young people that did go out and try to be engaged in the vote, people were trying to suppress their vote. And, you know, a lot of my concerns were that people would offer them or not offer them even a provisional ballot, and before they even try to do the research or try to help them to be able to really cast a real-time ballot, that, you know, it was either trying to just push a provisional ballot on them or not even give them a choice of even having a provisional ballot. So moving forward in these elections, and as my sister spoke before, and part of the organizing that we need to do is really push and organize around the educational piece for our new voters, as well as people that had not been engaged before, of what their power is and what they should be utilizing when they go to the polls, and really stand their ground on that. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. I'm not sure. I know Helen. Is Helen Butler on the line?
I'm on the line, Melanie.
Okay, Helen. Thank you. What's the good news?
Good morning, everyone. Not a whole lot, but there is some good news. I can tell you, Black women and women of color, is, as Dr. Jones said, we reflected the national. Black women and women of color turned out to vote. While Georgia didn't have many bright spots, we had one great spot, and that was the non-passage of the constitutional amendment for the takeover of schools. That was defeated resoundingly. 152 counties out of 159 voted against the passage of that amendment. Unfortunately, we lost the judicial qualifications amendment by the same token. But we do have coming back all of our Black women to the state representatives, House of Representatives, and Senate. But we also have an additional one coming back. It's Tanya Anderson out of DeKalb County, won her seat back. We do have in Douglas County, it has basically turned African American, and all of the sheriff and the county committee now Black elected officials. We also have picked up, will have in a runoff rather, a county commission here in Henry County, African American woman. So those are the bright spots in Georgia that we do have. We have also had, as others have said, many barriers to the election process and access to the polls, not having provisional ballot, not offering provisional ballots. We did have a couple of incidents where there was voter intimidation. It was not widespread as we had thought, but it was there. But luckily, we had 150 grassroots election protection volunteers and 200 legal election protection volunteers that assisted us, 300 volunteers that were there to help us provide rides to the polls. So those were some of the bright spots. The only other negative I would say is that for our HBCUs, especially at Morehouse, the turnout there was dismal. It was only 40%. And so we have to focus on getting our young people to really exercise their vote. We got a lot of them registered and tried to educate them by holding our Power of the Sister Vote at Spelman and doing some other activities, but still they didn't turn out. We even had rides to the polls for them if they were at the wrong precinct to take them to the correct precinct. Do a little more to make sure our young people engaged in the process. We do believe that, again, women in Georgia made a difference. We have to just get the other groups to follow along. And for the first time, we do have an Asian American gay person that was elected to the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Helen. Appreciate that, Georgia. We'll hear from Melissa. Alyssa Canty from North Carolina. And before you do that, I hear some background noise. So if you're on the speaker line, if you could put your phone on mute while we hear from our presenters. Thank you, Alyssa.
Good morning, everyone. So in North Carolina, as it was previously stated, we did elect a new state Supreme Court judge who's African American. And we also had some success with electing a new governor, so that gives us some hope that House Bill 2 would be repealed when they come back into session. The only bad thing is thinking that November 8th would end Election Day. We do have the governor's race that is currently being recounted. And there's also some talk that possibly, since now there is a more Democrat lead on the state Supreme Court, that there would be a special session to where the governor could appoint 2 judges to the Supreme Court. So that is one thing that we're trying to educate people on and get people ready to either make phone calls or write letters to the General Assembly to prevent that from happening. Besides that, we did have some other successes as far as not having as much voter intimidation as we expected and prepared for. We had a lot of different people on the ground on Election Day doing election protection in most of the rural counties and then also a lot of the urban counties that we work in. And we also were able to get a lot of students mobilized. We haven't been able to look at the percent, but similar to what it was for Morehouse, I know a lot of our campuses during early voting were only at the highest was 40%, and some were still in the single digits. So we're hoping that having events on Election Day and giving out free food may have helped increase the amount of students that voted. We also, most of our black women who were already part of the state legislature did get elected to return. Even with the redrawing of the district lines, Alma Adams, one of our favorite North Carolinians, got to keep her seat in D.C. And so those were pretty much all of our highlights from Election Day.
Thank you. Is P.D. Talley from Ohio on the line? Okay. Well, we'll just keep trying to get her back on. Sheila Tyson, I know there were some great judgeships won in Alabama.
Yes. Good morning.
Update on what happened with women in Alabama.
Good morning, and thanks for actually convening this call because it's a lot of information I didn't have. I have it now. We had great success in the state of Alabama, and I can definitely say that Black Women's Roundtable and Black Youth Vote had a big part in it. We had in Jefferson County, the largest county in Alabama, we had 17 black judges running, and it was 9 black women, and they won across the board, but all 17 won. But 9 of them was actually black women, and we had a lot of first-timers that was running, and it was a great success. It was a lot of hard work. We had a lot of voter suppression here, but we had a lot of attorneys because of attorneys running. We had a lot of volunteers actually helping us get the problems that we was having at the polls straightened out. But we definitely got to focus on this voters ID. It's getting totally out of control here in the state of Alabama. We have had our district attorney. We have never had a female district attorney and never have had a black one. And the cutoff, and we actually have one now. And we have never, and I know we're a nonpartisan group, but we have never in Jefferson County had a Democratic district attorney. And now they want to do a recount here in Jefferson County, so we are definitely a part of that and at the table with the discussion. I'm on my way to a meeting for that now, and it was just a great success. We were on the ground moving, and just thank Melanie and Black Women's Roundtable for assisting a great victory and a big change here in the state of Alabama.
Thank you, Councilwoman. lastly, we'll hear from Carol Joyner on this segment, who's the Director of Labor Project for Working Families and the Family Values at Work. Carol, are you still there? Is Carol still there? Okay, we'll come back to her. I know some people are in and out of a meeting. We're going to go to our next segment, which is the impact. And we have other states that are on the call. And before I do that, is Mothering Justice still on the call from Michigan? Okay. Okay. And see if anyone on for Mothering Justice, Detroit BWR, or Mothers of Hope out of Kalamazoo.
You are unmuting your audience.
Okay.
Yes, Mothering Justice is still on the phone. Sorry.
Okay. So sorry. Is that Tamika? If you had anything from Detroit to report out about victories for women in Michigan, or either Stephanie Moore from Kalamazoo, anybody from Michigan?
Well, we had a brief racial justice convening yesterday with a lot of the different nonprofits in the area, and we decided that we want to make a bold statement about the fact that we're not going to take this lightly, and we're going to do what we can to kind of make sure that things don't go backwards. So we were speaking about maybe doing a march in the Capitol around the time of the Electoral College handing in their paperwork. And I think that's supposed to be December 19th. But we want to make a general statement that all the organizations are going to sign off on, hopefully Tuesday.
Thank you, Tamika. We're going to move now to our last segment, and then after this segment, we'll open it up for Q&A from anyone that may have questions from the press. This last segment, certainly not the least segment, is really kind of looking to get some perspective from leaders who are out there from a national and a state level, focusing around issues around women's rights, economic and social justice, and what your perspective is about this impact of this election that had, as Avis laid out to us, a racial and a gender lens that was very much obviously not expected by all the pollsters, right? I think maybe one political scientist that I forget his name now, Lickman, who predicted this, so he should be getting a lot of research money, I assume. But I'm going to start with Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, co-chair National African American Clergy Network. Following her, Tamika Mallory, board member, Justice League New York. And then and Dr. Barbara, we're going to call on you to give you your perspective about what happened.
So it goes in right now.
Okay.
I'm hearing some background.
Yeah, and then I'm going to put
hold on, Barbara, before you start. Can we have folks put their phones on mute?
400.
Yeah, don't put on. Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, give us your perspective and insight.
Yes, thank you so much, and grateful to be on this call.
Barbara, hold on one second. Is there no background where you are, is it?
I hear a lot of background noise. There's none where I am.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. So hopefully that's better now.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, and hello, everybody. Everybody in the faith community knew, in the African American faith community knew, and that there was a 50-50 chance, that.
And Dr. Barbara, if you can yell across the football field.
Okay, yes. One candidate. Is this better?
Much better. Yes.
That either candidate had a chance of winning, but I think the surprise for the faith community was the majority of the faith community that, as Dr. DeWeaver said, chose race over equality, over justice, over other issues that were basic and core beliefs of the faith. 81% of the white evangelical community, 55% of those who are not evangelical but who are listed as Christians, 61% of Mormons, 52% of Catholics voted generally along racial lines, that is, joined other white Americans in voting along those lines, even when their core beliefs were being violated. And the lone exception was the Jewish community, people of Jewish faith, and the black church. I think the troubling issue for the black church that played a major role in black voter turnout, as has been stated, was the impact of voter suppression that had started after the 2012 race, where for the first time the black turnout was higher than the white. And so whereas churches were able in the past to go from a service and lead the whole congregation or people in the surrounding community to a voting registration site, most of those Sunday registration dates had been cut out. And so many days were cut down that it really did have, someone said, as much as a 15% negative impact on black voter turnout. Notwithstanding that, the black church did what it has always done historically. It used its own resources, putting people from the church in as registrars, as voting watch people, and even with pastors themselves showing up in those low-income communities where vulnerable citizens were expected to be intimidated. Thank goodness for the work of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where we had the 1-866-OUR vote number. There were many churches reporting, leading up to and including Election Day, voter suppression issues or efforts to mislead people. So that it really did suppress the vote. I would say the heartening news is that the denominations, the 8 historic denominations representing about 15 million or more African Americans, began working together, meeting monthly from early in the year, and therefore have a much tighter network going forward to monitor this, what goes on in the coming administration, including all of the appointments. There will be a letter coming forward, which we'll get back to you on, regarding the most troubling appointment of a white supremacist in the administration. But that the church is poised to monitor, to meet where necessary, but to resist where necessary as well. Thank you, Melanie. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Barber. Appreciate that so much. And I'm assuming also that network will be fighting to make sure that the affordable health care is still there for millions of Americans, as you all had already done.
Not care, but voting rights as well as the care for the vulnerable citizens and the budget cuts that may be coming. Yes.
Thank you so much. Tamika Mallory, are you there?
I am here.
Thank you, Tamika.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and to all of my sisters who are on the line. I do not want to take a lot of time to repeat what has already been said, and I think I will just very briefly take a few words from what Dr. Skinner has said in terms of, while many are very devastated, particularly when looking at younger people in this country who already felt disenfranchised going into the election, and then coming out of it knowing that we now have someone who we do not believe in any way, shape, or form has our best interests at heart, it is further devastating. But what I will say has been sort of a very good thing coming out of this is that more young people are engaged in understanding what the voting process looks like, what our engagement needs to be, and more people, particularly younger people, are interested in local elections. We are going to be focusing our attention heavily on local elections, clearly getting ready for the midterm elections, but also looking at some of the mayoral elections that are coming up, particularly in New York City. We have a mayoral election coming up in 2017. You clearly have the state houses, the governorships, and all of that, and we have more young people than ever who are asking questions, who now want to understand the electoral college system. They now want to understand what the different branches of government, what each one of them do, and how it impacts their lives. And we think that is a very, very important place to have people where they are and trying to.
Tamika, Tamika, something happened.
Okay.
Yeah, there.
Oh, better.
You're back.
Okay. Where there are younger people, who are engaged in the process and are doing, now trying to get information. We actually had a call last week. I don't know. I guess it was around Thursday evening, where hundreds of people from social media called into an open line just to hear information on what the electoral college process is and other details about what's next. So I think that if there's one thing, as Dr. Skinner said, that has come out of this is the ability to get more people interested in the process and working together in tighter networks so that we are able to make the necessary moves in the future so that our numbers do not indicate people who believe that not voting is the way to show your frustration, but rather voting in large turnout is more of what is necessary in order for us to get make sure our voices are heard and get our issues to the table. So we are very excited about that, not wanting to take a break at all, wanting to continue to move right into the process of engaging young black people, and particularly my sister Carmen Perez is going to be coming up to speak about how we understand the connection between the black and brown communities and how we must be working together on these issues. So I want to publicly thank, Melanie Campbell for being very specific about ensuring that our participation, that the millennial participation was considered, taken seriously, and resources put behind engaging, that particular demographic in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamika. Now we will hear from Carmen Perez, Executive Director of the Gathering of Justice for Justice. Following her will be Jessica Pierce, National Chair for BYP 100. Following Jessica will be Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner, with Executive Director and CEO and co-founder of Moms Rising. And closing out this segment will be our very own Holly Holiday, Esquire, Unity 16 National Campaign Manager for the National Coalition. And then following that, I'll turn it over to our Communications Manager, Enid Doggett, to field any questions we may have. So Carmen, Jessica, Kristen, and Holly. And Carmen, are you still there? Did you lose her?
Carmen.
Okay. Tamika, if you could try to see if she can get back on, I'm going to move to Jessica. Are you still there, Jessica?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Jessica Pierce with BYP 100.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, great. Happy to be on this call with everyone today. Definitely won't take up a lot of time here. But did want to kind of speak, I think, to the larger frame of this conversation and kind of what, our commitment is organizationally, but also kind of what the charge is, I think, to us as individuals and organizations moving forward in this moment. For BYP 100, organizationally, we absolutely ran a field campaign through this election in 10 cities across this country, predominantly black population, majority cities. A lot of cities like New Orleans, Jackson, Mississippi, These are also the same cities where our folks are developing policy initiatives, pushing agendas around economic justice and criminal justice reform and revolution. And these are the same cities where our folks are also taking to the streets and shutting things down. And so for us, I think that organizationally for BYP 100, we're uniquely positioned within a lot of the movements that a lot of times folks ask us to kind of pit against each other. And I think during this time, it's really important that we expand the framework of the context of our organizing to really make sure that we're being as strategic as we possibly can in this moment. And then even when we're looking at a lot of the exit poll data, I'm a huge data geek and appreciate all the data that was shared at the beginning of this call. But even further, I think that, when we're looking at this election and engagement, almost half of the eligible voters in this country did not vote, right? And that's not necessarily something that's specific to our demographic, but it is something specific to the political climate, and I think what people are kind of begging for in this moment in terms of the engagement that they need and the type of change that they're looking for, and not seeing it in what's existing right now. I also think that, in terms of turnout and looking at these numbers and the frustration that people feel in this moment is the frustration that young Black people have been feeling for a very long time. And so looking at this election in this moment is a moment of frustration and a moment of energy and people pushing for different things, but I think that we've been pushing for these different things in different ways for a really long time. And I think it's also important that we kind of look at the strategy that was built into this election. I mean, there was a strategy to disenfranchise, in particular, Black voters. This being the first national election since the Supreme Court ruling in 2013 on the Voting Rights Act, with us seeing over 800 polling locations that were closed across the country, new voter ID requirements, and then asking the question of why people didn't turn out to vote is an unfair question. And I think the question is, what type of political systems do we need right now? What type of political change do we want right now? What does that look like? And how is it going to have to be different? And I think that we are in a position right now where young Black people and BYP 100 in particular are in a way of looking at what we've done, making strategic choices, and being prepared to do things differently, to challenge more things, and to push for, radical change. Because a lot of times the radical change we're talking about is what people need right now to really stay engaged. And I think the great thing right now is that our folks who are involved in the election are still right now strategizing on local organizing campaigns. I mean, even right now, we still have more elections also that are coming up literally around the corner. So we have folks in Louisiana who are still prepared for election that's coming up in December. We have people in Jackson who are preparing for a mayoral election in March. So the work definitely isn't over. It just continues, and it continues in a different way. And the hope is that, we, as young Black people can kind of lead the charge around daring to be a little bit different and daring to challenge things and challenge systems and focus on, the system level changes and not just the individuals and individual situations at hand. So we're really excited to push forward and move forward and have this conversation about how we move this election, how we build on this election, and how we continue the work that is at hand.
Thank you, Jessica. Kristen?
Hi, are you guys there? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. Thanks. I had you on mute. I'm Kristen Ralph-Finkbeiner, Executive Director of Moms Rising, which has over 1 million members, including members in every state in the nation. We had a very active Moms Vote program to both educate, engage, and activate our members and moms across America to participate in the election. And we want to just thank, appreciate, applaud, and just really, I want to say, almost group hug the tremendous work of the Black Women's Roundtable that happened during this election, and just have a moment of deep appreciation for all that you have done and all that we have done together this election, as well as for all that we still have to do. We have heard from moms across the nation that the racism, sexism, and xenophobia that came directly out of Donald Trump's campaign has already been incredibly harmful to many of our children. It's created widening divides in our nation. We're seeing reports of bullying up between children, and we know we can do better. We will never give up. We also know that we together, all of us, are a powerful force when we do come together and that we're not alone. We did see some state wins, both in Arizona and Washington State. Important measures were passed on paid sick days and on raising the minimum wage. In California, important criminal justice reform propositions passed, as did several local public health measures to improve childhood nutrition. On gun safety, Washington State was the second state in the nation to pass the Extreme Risk Protection Order, and Nevada now has universal background checks. Despite those wins, we know we have a critical situation at the national level. It's absolutely critical. We are in it for the long haul, and we're in it for the long haul together. Moms Rising is committed to advancing policy and cultural change that make the world a better place for all moms and all families. It is with a renewed sense of urgency that we are embracing our mission to increase family economic security, to decrease discrimination against women and moms, to fight racism, sexism, and xenophobia, and to build a nation where businesses and families can succeed. So thank you so much for having me on the call, and we look forward to rolling up our sleeves and continuing this work with you, and we know that we truly are stronger together.
Thank you, Kristen. Want to make sure that Carmen Perez is not on the line. Okay, Holiday will come to report out in this segment, close us out. Did I hear someone on the line? Okay. Holly?
Thank you very much. You know, as we close and as we have heard many of the tremendous victories, I'd like to highlight that the strategy that won in this election is not sustainable. As we look at working class whites, although not exclusively working class white support, ranging from 62 to 66% for Trump. We look at Black, Latinos, and Asians, Clinton support ranging from 72 to 81%. Over the next 4 cycles, if this trend continues, white working class eligible voters is projected to decrease by 8 to 9 percentage points, while minority voters will continue to steadily increase. I think this creates an opportunity for us to start thinking about leadership. And at that rate, that could make this strategy the strategy of sexism, racism moving forward, extinct as soon as 2020. We look at our state legislative components and we already see that, particularly with Black leadership, they are starting to represent a significant portion of not just leadership, but of the body as a whole. We'll take 3 states as an example. In Georgia, while the Democrats hold a mere 62 seats, 47 of those seats are held by Black people. In Ohio, again, in the House, there's a mere 39, but 13 of those are held by Black people, 33%, and 6 of those are women. You look in a state like Florida, where 41 of the Democrats hold seats, and 20, almost 50% of those are African American, and 8 of those are Black women. And even in my home state of Missouri, probably one of the most unlikely places, where you have Democrats holding just 46 seats, and 21 of them are African American. So this, to me, says that the leadership is where we will focus and where we will continue to focus, and join with our partners that you've heard on the phone to continue to empower and defeat and fight back against anything that seeks to keep us unempowered, that we will use our voices, that we will continue to use our vote, and that we will continue to use our resources to do just that.
Thank you, Holly. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Enid Doggett, our communications manager, to field any questions.
Good morning, everyone. We are now taking press calls.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. My
Hi.
apologies.
Yes.
Oh.
Would you please excuse me? I'm using another mic now. We're now taking press calls. Please identify your name and the name of your outlet when asking your question.
Yes. Hi. Good morning, everyone. This is Donna Owens. I write for NBCNews.com and also Essence. I'm actually on the call today, though, for NBCNews.com. I wanted to share my email with you. I've got to jump on another conference call that another organization is doing at noon. So I wanted to ask any of you that if you'd like to follow up with me to please email me. I am covering the election, have been covering the election, have spoken with Melanie many times, have also been doing post-electoral coverage, and have also in my other role as in my other capacity as a Reuters journalist, have been covering the Freddie Gray case over the last year. So my email is deeowens9@gmail. DEE as in Donna, Edward, Owens, OWENS, and the number 9@gmail. And thank you very much to everybody. This was excellent information.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon and goodbye.
Thank you, Donna.
And thank you, Enid and Melanie, so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Next question.
Enid, this is Deborah Berry from
Justice.
Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
No, go ahead, sweetie. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I didn't have a question. This is Tamika with Mothering Justice here in Michigan, and I just wanted to point out some statistics as well from Michigan. So in Pontiac, there was a youth millage that was put on the ballot, and it would consist of money from the city being put into a future community center, kind of like a Boys and Girls Club, if you will, and that millage was passed. So that's a plus for Pontiac. Just as far as voting, repression, we all volunteered at different precincts last Tuesday, and we heard whispers of the ballot machines having issues accepting the ballot. So there was a lot of that going around in the city of Detroit. I personally had a couple of people reach out to me saying that they did not receive all of their ballots. So in Detroit, there were 2 sheets. A couple of people reached out to me and let me know that they only received 1. And one woman in particular actually went back to her precinct and received her second copy. So there was issues of that going on. Detroit also had 2 proposals presented to them, Proposal A and Proposal B. Proposal A was the one that was drafted by Sugar Law. Most importantly, Rashida Tlaib, who is an avid supporter of Mothering Justice in our agenda. And that was presented first after we had an overwhelming yes signature on our petition to actually have the proposal placed on the ballot. And then City Council came behind us and came out with Proposal B as a confusion tactic for Detroit voters. So a part of our GOTV phone banking was basically to make the voters aware of the difference between the two and to please vote for Proposal A. So that actually went on in the city of Detroit as well. So there was a lot of instances we also heard of voters having ID issues where they would come in and tell
Excuse me, Tamika. I have a couple of emails from reporters who have to get off, and this is our reporter segment. So thank you so much for your report. Are there any other reporter questions? Please identify yourself and your media outlet.
This is Deborah Berry from USA Today. And this question is directed toward Melanie mostly because the other day, Melanie, you mentioned or you said that we now, quote, face a period of uncertainty. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I assume you were talking about the GOP Congress and the Trump administration. Are you and other civil rights leaders preparing for a fight? And if so, what is that strategy and what are some of the issues you're kind of bracing for?
Thank you, Deborah. One of the things that we came together with 7 other civil rights organizations on Monday to release a joint statement about a couple of things. One, that we will continuously, vigorously fight for issues of civil rights and social justice as a part of our missions, no matter who gets elected. The other was to share, which some of you are hearing now in more granular detail, about what really happened and the impact of voter suppression that didn't start in 2016, but actually started especially after Shelby v. Holder decision by the Supreme Court, and that real impact. And as time goes, we're going to hear even more and see even more impact when these formal numbers, because these are exit poll data that we're talking about in things around voter suppression. And thirdly, that looking to see and follow in these next 100 days. What we're getting ready to do after this call is the Black Women's Roundtable will be strategizing about the next 100 days and what needs to happen. But one of the things is, as a representative group of civil rights, we also had a concern about the Bannon appointment as not being a signal of unifying the nation, but a signal of elevating some of the things that we all lived through and saw. I was on the ground in Florida and Ohio and Georgia, and know that there was a lot of tension on the ground when it came to issues of white supremacy being out there very, very overtly in 2016, and to have an appointment, one of the first appointments made at the White House, be someone who actually does engage with white supremacy. We can call it alt-right, but it's just a new frame that makes it more palatable for folks. But alt-right is about white nationalism and white supremacy, and that in itself is not a unifying factor when this nation is made of a melting pot of all kinds of people of race, gender, class, religion, and so forth. And so that was part of it. So for us moving forward, one, you have to take the time to analyze what happened and really taking the time to figure out how. And it's not the first time that a Democrat lost or a Republican won the White House, but it is the first time that we have in my lifetime had a situation where you have a white nationalist that's in the White House or could be in the White House. And being able to really push on the appointments that are made, as we always have done historically, and support those things that make sense, but not normalize a situation that is not good for the nation, let alone the world, in that regard. So I hope I answered the question, Deborah.
Next question.
Are you going?
You had a follow-up, Deborah?
Yeah, just to be clear, it is safe to say that you said you're going to take the next strategy. You're going to come up with a strategy to combat.
I mean, part of the strategy that we've been working on and continue to work on is how we engage the first 100 days. There are many folks who are playing different roles as it comes to how we engage, but also looking at what victories were made and what needs to happen. We talked about, Elsie laid out the fact that you had several women, several new folks on Capitol Hill. I know, for instance, the Joint Center is one of the groups, and we're definitely going to be doing some of the same, engaging those folks who were elected, especially those who were elected with high African-American women's vote, to make sure that they have diversity in their departments. You can go on Capitol Hill, and whether you talk to Republican or Democrat, and know there's a diversity issue on Capitol Hill to make sure that that we engage on that level. There are those who are working even with the President-elect Trump transition team. We're not there yet. We're trying to make sure that we're really clear about what our agenda and how we can move forward and work in coalition with folks to push for the things that were still our issues. Our agenda is still the issue it was on November the 8th. And we have to continue to push that and know that there is a mandate for us to continue to push that no matter who gets elected.
Okay. Thank you.
Next reporter question.
Hi, this is Erin Haynes-Wack from the Associated Press. Thank you so much for doing this call. My question is for Dr. Jones-DeWeaver. You talked a lot about, women and how they broke down here in this election. I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit more about whether you were hearing if women of color were really surprised by the lack of allyship on election day, specifically from white women. You referred to like a fool's gold, scenario in terms of white women and their support for Democratic candidates. Should Democratic women of color be looking to white women as partners who share their values or priorities, or why was it such a surprise that white women really weren't on board, even with Hillary Clinton being on the ballot?
I would say that, for people who study elections, for us, it wasn't really a surprise. All right. As I mentioned, this is a consistent behavior. However, there was a lot of speculation, given that this was a unusual election where you could have the first female president who happened to be a white woman running for office. And so given that very unusual scenario, I believe that there were some conjecture that this election might differ from past history in terms of having finally the white woman's vote break towards the white woman who was running for president of the United States. The fact of the matter is that when we and also, I would also add that given the specific behavior of the candidate that this woman was running against, I believe that it was also a very sort of safe assumption that perhaps women across racial barriers would be offended by someone who describes behavior that, quite frankly, is sexual assault, and not to mention other sort of insults that he'd made throughout not only the general election but the primary season, specifically targeting a wide variety of women. One would assume that given that scenario, that would benefit the female candidate, right? Ultimately, what we saw though was when the curtains were closed behind voters, white women tend to go back to their roots. And that was, and I'll be very frank, from my analysis, just as a political scientist, I would say that it seems to me that white women make the calculated decision that it is in their best interest to support white male supremacy over gender commonality, right? Over issues dealing with gender. And so in terms of moving forward as it relates to women of color, obviously it makes sense to certainly look to build alliances as best we can in order to push forward an agenda that we know is good for women and families and good for all women. But I believe that the challenge that we face is not just this issue of are black women or other women of color sort of disappointed, or should they not look to form alliances. I think the bigger question is for those institutions that fund organizations that seek to get out the vote, where should they invest their dollars? That's the biggest issue. And what we have seen over and over again is that those organizations tend to invest millions upon millions upon millions of dollars each and every electoral season, particularly presidential electoral season, targeting the suburban white woman voter. Each year they call her something different. One year it might be the soccer mom. The next year it might be something else. But it's the same person, okay? And each year they throw millions of dollars down that hole and virtually neglect those women voters who are coming out strong year after year to support their candidate. It would just be a logical decision to invest in those areas where you know your return is going to be in your favor and do everything that you can to maximize that vote. A big portion of which is reduce those voter suppression efforts that we've seen all across the country that disproportionately impact people of color, and particularly black people. If you invest your money into fighting those efforts, as well as getting out the vote in fertile ground, it seems to me that would be the logical way to move forward that would provide an outcome that would be more palatable for that specific end of the political spectrum.
Thank you very much for that. Just to follow up on that, though, with that speculation and conjecture, how much do you think that social media maybe contributed to giving people the illusion that maybe folks were more of an ally than they actually were when we got to Election Day?
I don't know that I would pinpoint specifically social media as being the only thing that may have given that assumption.
No. Right,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It may have been some of it. I think that every major network were covering polling data that was suggesting or making the assumption that the white woman's vote would break towards Hillary. Lots of major polls were suggesting that ahead of time. It may have been a situation where people weren't just being honest about who they were going to vote for. I'm not really sure what happened. Personally, I don't see social media as being the culprit here or being the one thing that misled people. Yeah.
Okay, and then I'm going to have Shireen Mitchell, who's very much a veteran around issues of social media and communications, to add to respond to that question. Who's also leading our social media for Black Women's Roundtable National Coalition. Shireen.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you. I think that's a really important question because, as we have seen, a lot of the alt-right pushing their agenda online. So although I don't think it was necessarily the impetus to sort of negate what the media was actually also pushing out, but I do want to make sure that we're pitting a couple of things here. During this time period that women of color who were also trying to get out the vote on social media, many of them were hacked actually during this election. At the same time, by the way, the alt-right was given way more opportunities on these platforms, and especially Twitter. If you haven't noticed recently, Twitter just pushed out that they have actually suspended those alt-right accounts, but they did it when? After the election. So even though I'm not saying that's the end all be all to this conversation, but it is a part of it. And I want to make sure that that part gets pinned in here, because we were still sort of having this conversation about the hacking that was happening, who was participating in that. And I don't think that's a media point that was carried through this conversation that I think now we need to go back and look at, especially with the reaction that Twitter finally suspended those alt-right accounts.
Thank you.
What last question? That anyone with any more questions? Okay, thank you.
I was going to say I had one more question. This is Erin, still from the AP. One more question for Barbara Williams Skinner. You talked about the faith community and that disconnect that broke down along racial lines. I'm wondering how much of that is due to a disconnect among faith leaders. I mean, I hear you saying that black clergy has been and is continuing to talk to each other, but I guess how much was black clergy engaged with white faith leaders during this political season, and is that something that needs to be happening more going forward so that this outcome is either not surprising or happening to a lesser extent?
Hi, this is Melanie. I would check, but I think Barbara had to get off and go into another meeting.
Gotcha.
But we will connect you to Barbara to do that follow-up question.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions.
And this is Melanie. I want to thank everyone, all of the speakers and the media and all of the listeners who joined this media briefing. We will be releasing a written report from what you've heard today. Also, we will be putting online the actual conversation, excuse me, later today for folks to be able to have an opportunity to go back and listen and visually see the briefing taking place. And then for those of you all who will be joining us for the strategy conversation, we're gonna move immediately to that and call us on that number that you have received for the Black Women's Roundtable. Thank you all again for everything, and thank all the speakers and media and staff and everyone for this this briefing. And everything just continues. Thank you.
Thank you all.